underneath this meeting now stream.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Council briefing of the 21st of July 2020. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Apologies and members on leave of absence. We do have Councillor Wallace on approved leave of absence, and we do have apologies this evening from Councillor Fotakis. Item 3, public question time and receiving of public statements. Can I just check, Manager, have we had any written statements this evening?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we have not received any written statements.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Vern, to the meeting. Would you like to make a statement for public question time?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vern. Okay, there being no other people in the public gallery and having received no written statements, I will close public question time, which brings us to our presentation for the evening, item 3A on the 2021 proposed budget. Thank you, CEO.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. We're just going to share some slides on the screen. And just as a bit of background and context for what has become a very unusual annual budget setting process, we did commence towards the end of last year the preparation for our annual budget process, which included reviewing and updating some of the assumptions behind the city's long-term financial plan, with a particular emphasis on addressing what had become a negative downward trend in the city's asset sustainability ratio, reflecting insufficient amount of funding related to renewal works for a large number of the city's assets, including buildings and roads. Also, the city, for the first time this year, participated in a local government professionals and PricewaterhouseCoopers benchmarking exercise, which enables this city to now track how it's performing in terms of service delivery against medium-sized metropolitan councils within Western Australia, Australia and New Zealand. And that's going to inform how we go about delivering and tracking our service delivery over the next few years. This year was also unusual in that it was a GRV, gross rental revaluation year, which impacted the budget, and the impact of COVID-19 essentially required us to reset our entire annual budget last financial year into our third quarter. So there has been a focus on the asset sustainability ratio, and we were working through some of that with the audit committee. And we commenced a series of budget workshops with council, as is usual during our annual budget process, where we test our assumptions and start putting in place the settings around capital works, operating expenditure, fees and charges to inform our rate setting. Then on the 15th of March 2020, a state of emergency was declared in relation to the coronavirus pandemic. And that required us to review all our operations, close some of our facilities like BD Park and the library, and had an immediate impact on some of our non-rate revenue sources, including car parking. The city immediately ceased discretionary spending where possible in April, and we worked with council on revising the fourth quarter budget based on an estimated reduction in revenue of about $4 million. And that delivered an operating surplus of $280,399 due to very close management of our expenditure during that last quarter. At the same time as the city was able to maintain full service delivery for those facilities that were not impacted by closures, such as the library and BD Park. I'm just going to check with Wendy on whether or not the slides are moving, because I'm not getting any. Oh, there we go. So the themes for preparing the budget this year in close collaboration with elected members during the budget workshops, we're assuming a very conservative and pessimistic outlook for our revenue sources during the course of the next financial year. We are particularly focused through the COVID committee and our COVID relief and recovery strategy on the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on our community groups, our vulnerable members of the community, and in particular small businesses who have been heavily impacted by closures of some of their businesses due to the public health restrictions. And we're looking wherever possible to provide hardship support and accessing special purpose reserves to support community groups utilising for the first time the reserve of the Leederville Gardens Trust, as well as cash into expenditure related to the Percent for Art policy to support artists who were impacted by the COVID restrictions. We've been maintaining strong discipline, downward discipline on any discretionary expenditure within administration, but at the same time we've managed to maintain all our permanent staff members, with the exception of having to stand down some Beatty Park casual staff members when that facility was closed. But I'm pleased to be able to advise council that with the reopening of Beatty Park and the increasing in numbers, that the casual staff numbers are increasing, not back to full level, but getting very close to being able to restore a lot of our casual employment at that facility as well. We're committing during the next year to work with elected members on quarterly budget reviews to enable us to track revenue coming in over the next few months, as we can see what the impact is on the easing of restrictions, and that is particularly important around car parking revenue, as well as working closely with our lessees on our properties to be able to track what the impact on their businesses are of the easing of restrictions over the last few weeks. The revenue outlook for next financial year. Just going to click on that slide to see if that worked, Wendy. Could you just click to the next slide? I think we've got it. There was a commitment by council to freeze the total rate revenue yield next financial year. I'm just going to go back because that flicked too quickly. Thanks, Wendy. Can you go back 2 more slides? Okay. If we can just go back to revenue outlook 2020-21. We have assumed that there'd be a up to 50% reduction in Beatty Park membership and swim school fees at revenue during the course of the financial year, as well as a 50% reduction in parking revenue. There's been a ministerial order on the interest that we can charge on debtors, and the COVID Committee of Council has been considering lease waivers in line with the Code of Conduct for property owners. And we've been waiving and deferring lease payments for commercial tenants, and committed to no increase in fees and charges over the course of the financial year, as well as putting in place a financial hardship policy and a series of measures which will assist ratepayers who are experiencing financial hardship. To note on the expenditure outlook, there has been the administration staff have voted to freeze the CPI increment of up to 3% under the enterprise agreement for next financial year, resulting in a saving to the budget of around about $400,000 this financial year. Sorry. And that we're also tracking expenditure I think there might just be a delay in the screens because they're going through Wendy's computer. So Wendy, we've just lost the slides on the projector on the right-hand side. Okay, got it. Thanks. And now I've lost it on the other screen, Wendy, but that's okay. And in response to the restrictions, we also reduced the city's expenditure on marketing and events, and a large number of community events and city events were cancelled because of the restrictions on public gathering. And there's been a reduction on interest charges on loans. We are aiming to still maintain a strong capital expenditure program for next financial year, and have been working to map out a capital works program for the next 4 years in line with our long-term financial plan, and increasing the proportion of capital works focused on renewal as opposed to new works or upgrades on our assets. That will, over the next few years, address our asset sustainability ratio, which has been a focus of our preparation for this budget, and looking to do capital works and maintenance over the next few months when it is opportune to do so, particularly for some of the facilities which may have been impacted by reduced demand. The key focus for the next financial year based around the budget will be supporting small businesses in the local economy, and we're preparing an economic rebound plan, and we'll be doing that in consultation and collaboration with the city's 6 town teams. We're also working on a community rebound plan for sporting and community groups to make sure we're able to actively support community wellbeing and recreation facilities during the course of the next financial year. We still have a major project which was deferred by council earlier this year on introducing a 3rd bin for food organics and garden organics waste collection next year. We're still committed to implementing our sustainable environment strategy and projects related to solar panels on city-owned buildings, bringing forward a major piece of maintenance work for BD Park, particularly around the indoor pool and the change room facilities, and maintaining a high level of commitment by council on greening parks and open space, and ensuring that we are spending a sufficient amount of money to maintain our local road network. And I should also note, during the course of this year, 2 months into our budget preparation at the start of the year, we were very pleased to welcome a new Executive Director of Community and Business Services, and we were able to hand over the management of the budget in February to Virginia, just in time to deal with some particularly unusual circumstances around GRV revaluations and the impact of COVID-19. I'm just going to hand the clicker over to Virginia.
Thank you, CEO. Yes, it was an interesting introduction to the City of Vincent. A couple of budget changes, and then also managing the COVID process. So just to finish off our presentation for this evening, I just want to talk through very quickly. So just to sum up, where does that leave the city? The combination of changes to our expenditure and close management of projects means that we are expecting to present a minor surplus to the city. We will be using special purpose reserves to provide our community with additional support. So in particular, there's $525,000 that we will be drawing from the percent for public art reserve that will be used for public art activities over the next 12 months. And where possible, we'll use that to assist us in activating town centres and bringing a sense of liveliness to those environments and to support the local economy. We also have the Leederville Gardens Trust, where we will be using $1 million of money from that trust for special purpose support through charities for those vulnerable people in our community. And there's a variety of different programs there, including providing people with support with food, homelessness, and so on. So the cash position for the city, we will be seeing a reduction in our reserves of $3.2 million over the next 12 months based on these assumptions, and our net decrease in cash will be $5 million. So I just want to finish up by talking through the GRV revaluation that David mentioned a moment ago. As we know, it's been an incredibly difficult year across the board, and COVID has been unprecedented in its impact on our community and also on our own business. And then in addition to that, we have the Triennial GRV revaluation. Now, the City of Vincent, along with other local governments, and it was fairly unanimous across the sector, sought for the state government to freeze the revaluation for this year because it does add a degree of volatility to property values, which then make it difficult for us to provide a degree of certainty for our ratepayers in terms of the rate levy that they will see. Understanding that we had this challenge and that we weren't able to freeze it, we have proposed that we have the following rate strategy, which is that we will be using our 2019 rates growth, which is valued at about $250,000, and put that towards a hardship fund for the community, particularly with regards to their rates. We're proposing that our rates revenue will remain at 2019 levels, and also our minimum rates will remain at 2019 levels. Our rates modelling, the approach that we have chosen softens the impact on our commercial and business environment with no rate in the dollar increase. And we note that for many individuals and families, if they have been financially impacted, there have been some assistance programs such as JobKeeper that have assist people financially, but the same level of support has not necessarily flowed through to our commercial environments, which is the reason that we decided to take that approach. And we will be making sure that we do provide additional financial hardship support for individuals and families. So not to underestimate how complex all of these different elements were, we had 17 different scenarios that we financially modelled to try and work out what was the best mix between minimising impact on our community, supporting our local businesses, but also ensuring that we maintain a degree of sustainability for the city itself, noting that we were expecting revenue to drop $10 million. So there was a number of different competing priorities there, which were quite difficult. Just to explain to our ratepayers, and I would like to just take a moment to say we received 5 written submissions from our ratepayers with regards to the differential rates that are proposed. I'd like to thank each of those people for providing those comments. I've read them in detail, and I know that the elected members have as well. And they certainly provide us with, very compelling arguments as to why we should approach differential rates in different ways. So I just want to acknowledge that. There's 3 different scenarios that I just wanted to expand on that for our ratepayers to sort of see what the various impacts are. So if we had decided to make no changes to the rate in the dollar, then we still would have seen a minor impact to residential and commercial ratepayers with some increases due to the underlying property values. So we're talking about 300 ratepayers would be impacted in that scenario, and the city's revenue would be impacted by 2.7 million. That is certainly an option, and elected members can consider that. Another option, which is sort of the traditional local government model, if you like, is one where we don't make a change to the rates revenue and then effectively spread the impact across all of our properties based on their proportion of property value. If we did that, then our rate in the dollar for residential would increase by 17%, and the commercial rate in the dollar would increase by 3.65%. And then you can see in the next column, what does that mean in terms of actual ratepayers impacted? So 26% of our residential ratepayers, or 5,000 people, would be impacted with an increase to their rates. And on the commercial side, 47%, or 748 commercial ratepayers, would see an increase. In that situation, the city would not have any increase in its total rates revenue. We would receive the same revenue as 2019, but we would still see, because of the property value changes, an underlying increase for some areas of our ratepayers. I also note that I'll be mentioning in a moment, but there is roughly $400,000 that has been set aside for hardship funding, which is considered in this budget. So we are maintaining the rates at that level, but also absorbing another $400,000 worth of support for our ratepayers as well. The third option on that screen is the one that we are currently proposing, which is that we have no change to our total rates revenue, and that we have no change to the rate in the dollar for our commercial businesses for the reasons I just mentioned. So what that, the flow on impact of that is that our residential rate in the dollar moves from 17% increase to 18.9% increase. And the number of residential ratepayers who experience an increases from 26% to 37%, or from 5,000 to roughly 6,100 residential ratepayers seeing a rates increase. On the commercial side, as I said, the rate in the dollar doesn't increase, but the underlying model is that there will be about 49 commercial ratepayers who will see a rate increase as well. So a fairly complex situation, and that last one, just to reiterate, no additional rates revenue for the city, and it also includes $400,000 of hardship funding. Just to further explain that in the scenario that I've presented, we have about 34% of ratepayers, or 5,800, will see a decrease in their rates levy this year based on that scenario. 28%, or 4,903, will have the same rates levy for this year. And then the 37% of residential ratepayers will have an increase. To give an idea of the degree of impact, 41% of our ratepayers who have an increase will have less than a 4% increase, and 81% will have less than 10% increase. So still a significant impact, and not one that we take lightly. Just to demonstrate, the city's rates revenue for 2019 was $35.7 million, and the rates revenue that is currently presented in the proposed budget is $35.6 million. And my last slide talks about the financial support that we're providing for our community. So I suppose the very first thing that is available to all ratepayers is that we will be providing what we're calling rate smoothing, where individuals can agree to pay their rates on a weekly, fortnightly or monthly basis. There will still be the option of paying by 4 instalments if ratepayers choose to do that, and also the ability to pay upfront as well. It just provides another way for ratepayers to settle their rates levy. It will actually cost the city $50,000 to implement that, and so I've included that in the financial support tally. We also encourage all ratepayers who are experiencing hardship or difficulty in paying their rates to discuss that with us, because we have set up a number of different processes to assist them. It could be that we can defer their payments for 6 months. We can provide flexible payment plans free from fees and interest, and that will the city will be absorbing $135,000 worth of interest payments under that scenario. I mentioned earlier that the rates growth from 2019 will be directed into a financial hardship fund. That is worth $250,000. And for those individuals who are experiencing difficulty in meeting their financial, their payment plans through the methods I've just mentioned, we may be able to assist them by providing them with a part of their rates being waived to assist them through this difficult time. So in total, the city has set aside $435,000 in financial support, in addition to the various community support mechanisms that we discussed earlier. And with that, I think I will close this presentation.
Thank you very much, CEO and Director. Given that that's a presentation and this is an item on the agenda, what I will do is we'll move on to declarations of interest, but we can take questions on this item as our first item for the evening. So hold those thoughts for just a moment while we deal with declarations of interest. CEO?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I've got a number of declarations of interest in relation to item 8.3, which relates to the appointment of elected members and community representatives to advisory groups. And I might just note those in bulk. The names of the community representatives are included in a confidential attachment. So I might just note the declarations received from elected members and one from myself, which include a declaration of impartiality from Councillor Hallett, noting that Councillor Hallett previously worked with one of the community applicants. A declaration of interest from Councillor Smith in relation to the same item, noting that one of the community nominees was a former colleague of Councillor Smith. Councillor Gondaszewski has declared that she is a personal associate with one of the nominees for the Arts Advisory Group. Mayor Cole, I've declared an interest in the same item, noting that I'm a former colleague with one of the community representative applicants.
Just noting that's your declaration, just in case that was confusing.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. There's a declaration of interest from Councillor Castle, noting that she's an acquaintance with one of the nominees of the advisory groups. So I think I've got a duplicate there. Councillor Castle has a declaration of interest in relation to finance and proximity, item 11.8, noting that the Friends of Anzac Cottage are a client of Councillor Castle's business. And that is the extent of the declarations received tonight, Mayor Cole.
Thank you very much, CEO. Okay, so we will deal with the adoption of the 2021 annual budget first, which is item 7.6, given that we've just had the presentation. Council members, this is your opportunity to ask questions, either on the presentation or just on the detailed budget papers before you. Councillor Gondaszewski.
I just had a question in relation to the bike network design item for the design of the Norfolk Street element of the bike network. I just wanted to check whether this was fully or at least partially grant funded, or whether this was all I think it was 50,000 proposed allocation, and whether there was any commentary on that in relation to some of the concerns raised about the current state of the Department of Transport long-term cycle network plan and the Hyde Park section of the bike lane, the William Street parallel proposed bike lane, just whether there's been any consideration of whether this should proceed at this time in light of that, and whether it is likely to proceed prior to the consideration of consultation on the long-term cycle network.
So, McCall, if I can take that question. So it is 50% grant funded, and it's design only. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll go ahead. We'll do the design and the work, and then typically we would look to insert it into next year's budget. In terms of the long-term cycle network, that consultation has now closed. So we'll be bringing a report to council hopefully in August to tell you what the consultation said and whether anything in the long-term network should change. So we've not preempted any discussion on that.
If I could just one more, just in terms of the toilet upgrade at the Loftus Community Centre, I just hadn't previously noted this as being referenced in prior papers, and just wanted to check if this was upgrade rather than renewal because of accessibility.
So you might call, yeah, the toilets are not up to standard. So they definitely don't meet modern accessibility standards. So the idea is that we would renew and upgrade at the same time to meet the current standard.
And the provision of solar panels on Perth Soccer Club, just to check whether this has been triggered through the receipt of a grant by the club, and whether that is similar to I think it's the lighting upgrade at Leaderville Tennis Club. Both of those new and upgrade works being sort of, I guess, prioritised because they are also, those organisations have received external funding.
Sorry, Nicole. I believe the tennis club is grant funded externally, so that's why we're doing that. The Perth Soccer Club, I'll need to take that on notice. There are some financial arrangements, but I haven't got them at my fingertips. I can take that on notice.
That'll do for me for now.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. A couple of questions through you to Director of Community and Business. So firstly, just relate to the submissions, but the general principle of setting rates on the basis of the gross rental value. The recommendation, a lot of the commentary talks about the cost of offering the services of local government doesn't directly correlate with the value of somebody's property. But the question that has been asked as part of the submissions, and that is always asked, if that's the way in which local governments are to set their rates, then it should rise and fall appropriately with it. Can we just get some commentary from administration as to why, as to why it is tied to the GRV and how that's represented in local government across the sector, and specifically in Vincent, I suppose. And I've got a question about commercial as well, but just, I guess, yeah, the philosophical response, I suppose, to why it is that if the GRV value go up, in general, local governments tend to benefit, and if GRV goes down because of the ability to change rate in the dollar, generally local governments at worst don't lose.
I think that's a fair comment. First of all, for members of the public who are interested, there is some useful information on both Landgate's website and also the WALGA, the WA Local Government Professionals, have prepared some information on this. It is a complex area. In short, If the rates were linked to property values, then they would have definitely been much higher over a 10-year period than by linking it to the GRV model. So that is preferred. I suppose the difference between what we do here and a commercial environment is that we understand that we are providing a base level of services to the community. Some of those are legislated. We're required to provide them to the community. There's an expectation that there are, for all ratepayers, they share a part of the burden of the delivery of those services, be it through the provision of roads, the provision of parks, the delivery of picking up waste and so on. So the methodology is based on the concept that the city, I suppose, comes up with its best case scenario in terms of the delivery of those services, and then spreads the burden of the cost of providing those services as uniformly across ratepayers as possible. And the methodology that's set for us in the various legislations is to use the GRV to do that.
So I've got two more, if that's okay. Just for clarity, the hardship fund or the hardship measures that are being proposed, are they accessible to commercial as well? And can you perhaps give a response in terms of what would need to be proven, given that most commercial ratepayers are not, well, if the property is let, the actual rates burden falls upon the tenant, and how we would actually assess whether either the landlord or government mandated measures that are in place at the current time, how we would actually assess whether that is effectively, if there's double dipping going on.
Yeah, I suppose the first thing I'd mention is that we understand that the financial hardship approach is there for both residential and commercial ratepayers. The approach that we've taken is very similar to that's taken by some of the larger utilities, such as Watercorp, who have the same sort of scenario. Typically, the rates burden is carried by either the tenant or the property owner. So we would be, if there is an example of hardship, then we would be working with whoever it is that bears the weight of that levy. And I suppose we would be going through the same general steps. So the first thing that we'd be doing is discussing the financial situation of that particular proponent. We would be talking to them about their ability to pay and whether or not they need a period of deferral, whether or not they need a more acceptable payment plan, and we'd work through those steps. There is also the option of providing the financial hardship fund that would be applied in the same way that we would for other ratepayers. We're sort of taking an agnostic approach based on regardless of who is making the submission. And then in terms of the burden of proof, it's going to, as you say, it's going to be a little bit more difficult with commercial property owners, but we would be asking for some evidence that they are in a situation of financial crisis. And what we have done, say, for example, with our commercial tenants, is we've asked for evidence between two similar commercial periods where we can demonstrate the financial impact on their business, say, for example, from COVID. So it could, for example, be a July 2019 to a July 2020 comparison, which demonstrates to us through their financial statements that there has been a discernible financial impact, and that they would benefit from some form of support at this point in time.
Thank you. And the last one, again, it's more general. So the recommendation that's been put forward is quite heavily, well, I suppose it favours commercial properties, and
it does.
Given the impact, the financial impact, of the past few months that's been felt on business, but likewise, most of the government incentives, both federal and state, that have been provided have been targeted to employers and to businesses, whilst it could be argued that something like Job Seeker is targeted at the individual. Most of the methodology that's been applied in the funding from certainly from the federal government has been to try and keep people employed and to encourage businesses. Are we comfortable that I guess the people that fall out, the people who fall outside of that system, where they've either lost their job or working for less than 12 months or otherwise, and their impact is likely to be felt in the residential side, are we, well, clearly it's the recommendation, but if we can just get some commentary around why that focus has been on a relatively small, I know the impact in percentage terms is misleading because there's only 1,500 odd commercial ratepayers in the city, but just some commentary around why that the recommendation is to focus the lower rate rise and that concentration on the commercial side that has received other support.
Look, I think this is a judgment call, and I don't think there's any the complexity of the situation that our community faces is unprecedented. As I mentioned a moment ago, we had 17 different scenarios that we looked at, and I think you could probably argue each and every one of those in one way, shape or form. As the result of detailed conversations, we felt that the preferred recommendation was to provide an additional level of support for commercial businesses. And I think this reflects the fact that many of our local businesses were some of the most heavily impacted by the COVID restrictions and were forced to actually close their doors. And so, food and beverage and entertainment is highly represented in the Vincent area. If we can support those commercial businesses through this really difficult time, our entire community benefits. They provide that infrastructure around us, the coffee shops that we love going to, and the entertainment venues that we love going to. So, we all benefit by supporting that group. That was the logic. And I suppose we have also received some submissions from our community which have provided alternative views. As I said, I think they are very compelling arguments as well. So ultimately, we have a difficult decision to make, and we have the opportunity to consider that. And I would encourage our community to continue to talk to us about what they would prefer to see.
Thank you. And I'm happy for you to take it on notice, but can you confirm also, I think since the differential rate was brought in for commercial in 2014, I'll ask the question then, am I correct that the increase for a residential property GRV aside has been roughly 40% as opposed to residential, which has been something in the order of 12 to 14? Roughly, I think, over that time. You won't have, I don't think you'll have the answer now, but I think at the time where the differential rate was brought in, I think that the rate in the dollar change and that there was a significant jump at that time, but I think that the disparity between the two was introduced fairly quickly. I'd be interested in what that overall change has been in that over that period. If somebody has a place that has a GRV that they rent commercially for $50,000 or and the same residentially, what that impact has been in that time since the differential rate. I think that the commercial has borne most of the burden up until the last couple of years.
I can see, I've got a table in front of me dating back to 2013-14, and at that time the commercial and residential had the same rate in the dollar. And then the following year, the commercial rate in the dollar, from what I can tell, increased quite significantly the following year. So I'll go away and do a little bit more fact checking on that. But I think your premise is correct that dating back to 2014, it looks like there was a significant change to the commercial rate in the dollar at that time. And I'd say the logic of that was probably that we do provide various services to businesses such as parking facilities that they are the beneficiaries of. So it could be that that was part of the right sizing of that contribution. But I can definitely include that in the briefing notes. We can have a little bit more information on that.
I think in the context of the question that was asked before, I think that particularly in relation to the submissions that were received, I think it's important to frame it in that context as well as not just the last 12 or 24 months, but that change was significant in a relatively short space of time.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
Yes, I was just wondering if that was a preamble to another question.
Yeah.
Just before, Councillor Loden, I know you have your hand in the air, but this is a supplementary question, if I might, to this theme. I was just considering that, we've received these submissions today. They have raised some very salient points, and one of the submitters raises this issue of the fact that by not just going with the option where you look at the, I think it's described here as the no change to total rates revenue allocated based land revenue, where you basically just apply it across the board.
Yeah.
In effect, by having no change to the commercial rate in the dollar, there is an additional 1.9% increase in the rate in the dollar for residential. And the question is, should residential ratepayers compensate? So I did just want to ask that under the option where it's spread across the board, and that shows that 47% of commercial ratepayers would receive an increase, which is 748. If the city was to take that liability, if you like, rather than taking that 1.9% and applying it to the residential rate in the dollar, what would that cost?
Yeah, I'll take that one on notice. I can certainly do those figures.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Loden.
Just on that topic of GRV, the city's obviously done GRV revaluations previously, and to my recollection, those GRVs have increased, and in some cases increased quite significantly. On those occasions when council has done their subsequent budgets, has the rate gone up proportional to the rate that the GRV has gone up, or has it gone up at say 2-3% instead, or whatever it is required that council needs to fund the budget?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I have got a table which I'm happy to make available and to publish. I think that's transparent and people can do the sums themselves. It goes back to 2013, and there's no simple answer to your question because it is actually highly variable in terms of the underlying values that have changed, and then what council has decided to do in terms of the respective changes for the various differential categories. So, but probably what I can say is in that previous 7 years, our GRV has continued to increase year on year. This is the first year that we have actually seen such a large reset in terms of a reduction in our property values. So once again, this is a quite a unique situation compounded by COVID, of course.
So maybe to be more specific, the last time we had a GRV revaluation, what was the average increase in GRV across the city of Vincent? And then what was what percentage increase did we see in rates taken by the city?
I'll take that one on notice and provide you with those figures.
Perhaps, Director, it might go to that information that I did seek earlier. And I think that the information that was provided to me, which, are you happy for me to take this?
Yep.
It's the information that I have received today is that in 2014-15, there was a 29% overall increase in the GRV. However, in that year, the city decreased the rate in the dollar by 17%. And in 2017-18, which is the most recent revaluation year, there was no significant increase in the GRV, which only increased by 2.9%, which was just flowed on as natural growth. So you have to go back, not the time before, but the time before that, where the impact was lessened. Not fully, but from 29% to 17%.
So if conceptually, the point is if we saw a 30% increase in GRV, we wouldn't then see a 30% increase in our cost that we would charge to residents, that would it be fair to say that GRV is a mechanism to determine what the equitable take is from the residential base and is used as a relative way of determining what rates people pay rather than an absolute amount? So if GRV goes up significantly, we don't take significantly increased rates, but then when the reverse happens and GRV goes down significantly, we still take a consistent absolute amount of rates effectively.
I think you've answered that perfectly.
I was just going to say you self-answered.
Yeah.
I
Certainly, you
did
articulated
preface
it
with,
better than I did.
Is it correct to say?
Yeah.
And
And I would say, Councillor Loden, it is correct to say that. You did very well.
through you, Michael, the general approach would be to neutralise the impact of the revaluation to ensure that we're not budgeting around windfall increases or windfall decreases in our rate revenue, and to go about setting the budget based on meeting council's objectives and the service delivery that's required for the population base that we're serving.
Then would it also be fair to say that when these revaluations happen, the determination of whether an individual sees an increase or decrease in their rates is not a measure of the absolute GRV value of their property, but more where they sit compared to everybody else? So if they are in the top 50% of GRV revaluations, they are likely to see an increase, and if they're in the bottom 50%, they're likely to see a decrease.
That's exactly right. So we take the total property GRV values as an entirety, and then we basically divide the budget component into that. So you effectively work out a rate in the dollar that gets applied across the entire cohort. So mathematically, what that means is that you really you're applying your proportion compared to the overall group, if you like, as opposed to taking that GRV value and applying that on a case-by-case basis.
Councillor Hallett.
Possibly a quick one. I'm just wondering if, through the Mayor to the Director, if you can provide a bit of commentary just on the differential rate around the vacant residential and vacant commercial. And I guess just I understand that there's an incentivising aspect to having a different rate there. But what are the limitations around making those more extreme, and what benefit or not would that be for our budget bottom line?
So through you, Mayor Cole, Councillor Hallett is correct. We have a different rate in the dollar for our vacant residential and for our commercial vacant areas. So they are vacant residential. I think we have, I'll need to double check that. Look, I think I'll take that one on notice, because I do want to answer that correctly. But in principle, the idea is that we do want to incentivise the development of those vacant lands, be they residential, be they commercial, for the benefit of the overall community. So that's part of the policy setting that council will go through, and I can answer the specifics around the dollars and the values for you in the briefing notes.
Just through you, Mayor Cole, just for clarity, just because there was some confusion in the submissions, vacant residential and vacant commercial refers to vacant land, not unoccupied buildings. And just to confirm that it's not possible to have a differential rate for buildings that are unoccupied or portions of, just because there were some submissions, and there's often talk in relation to that as an incentive measure. Is that correct?
Yeah. Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct. It's actually a vacant block of land is what we're talking about, as opposed to a shop that is sitting there vacant.
Councillors. Councillor, I'll just go. Is there any council members who haven't asked a question yet that want to jump in? Okay, Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to ask this before. Just in the briefing notes, if I could, if we're able to get our asset ratios for this year on the basis of this budget in comparison to last year, just I've got it in one spot, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yep, through you, Mayor Cole, I'll put those in the briefing notes.
Council members, any further questions before I ask my questions? Okay. Okay, I just wanted to ask about the hardship provision. It does include in the report discussion on a $250 per person cap. And I just wanted to raise whether there could be some discretion around that, given that the extent of rates can vary quite significantly. I'm happy for you to take that on notice. I also thought that it would be very useful to include commentary in reference to the $1 million odd that we've dispersed to public benevolent institutions through the Leederville Gardens trust funds, but given that that is to provide support for hardship for Vincent residents. Obviously, some is tied to homelessness, but others is for pensioners and other is through food bank, etc. So quite a wide range of services which are specific to City of Vincent residents. So I think that's a request whether that could be considered. I would really like to see a further breakdown of the Beatty Park Leisure Centre works. I think that the works around the pool and the retiling is quite straightforward and common sense, but I think that there is also, I understand it includes works to change rooms, and I just wanted to also ask whether a business case will come forward to council for approval prior to expenditure, given that that is $2.9 million. Just a follow-up question in relation to the solar PV on the Perth Soccer Club. Did you already ask that question?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, that's just to understand. I think that council was wanting to fund solar PV where the council was paying the electricity bills, given that the budget's pretty tight, and that was the preference. So just checking that. And also I had been aware that this federal government had been offering solar PV grants for community buildings, and that might also be an option. Also just wanted to flag light fleet and whether that's been reviewed in terms of whether all light fleet is necessary and must be purchased. And just a final question in terms of the waiving of rates in the recommendation, it talks about Florida Athena Football Club rates waiver of $23,000, and I'm just wondering whether that's commensurate with the fact that their lease of Litter Stadium comes to an end in October and it will just be their club rooms only thereafter.
I'll take those on notice. Thanks, Nicole.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. That was a good hour well spent. Okay, we'll go back to the beginning of the agenda. You'll note that we have nil items for strategy and development, which is pretty unusual, but I am advised that that doesn't mean that we've had a dramatic slowdown in our development applications and that things are still chugging along pretty well. And welcome to our Acting Director, Jane Naidoo, who is a regular attendee at our council meetings, so very familiar face, but we welcome you to the position of Acting Director. So we'll move to Infrastructure and Environment, 6.1, Waste Strategy Project 2, Bulk Hard Waste Options Appraisal Progress Report. Questions? No questions? I did jot down a couple. Okay, can I please ask, I'm just seeking a bit of guidance on the consultation on the charged services, options 2A and 3A, the rationale, Director. Page 58.
Nicole, the rationale for
For consulting on charged services as opposed to uncharged.
the rationale is that in terms of the council's vision in the waste strategy of zero waste to landfill, those give the best outcomes in terms of reducing waste. In other words, a charge service that isn't, so in other words, the service is not included in rates. It's actually separately charged for those who require that service. So research and other councils that do that show that that gives us the best outcome in terms of waste reduction.
Okay, so you're wanting to go broad and look at all options at this stage?
Yes, we might call yes.
Okay. I just wanted to also ask, will the consultation include information on the community panel's view?
3 McCall, yes, it will.
Okay. And also I just wanted to ask what's the cost of Catalyse running the consultation and why Catalyse are not in-house?
Yes, we call. I can take that on notice. I'm not sure the exact cost.
Any comment on why Catalyse are not in-house?
So McCall, they did the FOGO consultation for us, if you remember, the way they target a certain number of responses and provide that information in the way they do. For consistency, we decided to use Catalyse for this consultation as well. So,
Councillors, any questions? Okay, thank you, Director. Moving on to 6.2, tender 576 of 20, pavement profiling and supply and laying of hot mixed asphalt, appointment of successful tenderer. Councillor Loden, come on down.
I've got a couple of questions on the confidential pages, so I was wondering if we could do that at the end of the meeting, maybe.
Sure, no problem at all. Does anyone have any questions on the tender that is not related to the confidential attachments? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Well, it isn't, it isn't, but just a question as to why the recommendation doesn't list the proposed value for the tender. I've gone back through some of our previously awarded tenders and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, but I think we're tending towards don't these days, and whether there's a decision in that and the considerations of transparency, so on.
no, I mean, through you, McCall, I don't recollect us ever putting the price in my time in Vincent. I mean, it's in the financial implication, so, a typical cost of the contract. So either way, it could go in the recommendation or not. I mean, the information is there, it's not hidden. It is, so, but I think in my time, we've not done that as a matter of routine.
Okay, any further questions on this particular tender? Okay, I'll move on to item 6.3, tender 570 of 19, pavement marking services, appointment of successful tenderer. No questions, okay. And 6.4, tender 577 of 19, concrete crossovers and cast in situ concrete paths, appointment of successful tenderer. No, okay, we'll come back to, was it just to clarify, Councillor Loden, was it just the confidential attachment on 6.2 or on all tender items?
Just on 6.2.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll move to community and business services. Item 7.1, draft youth action plan 2020 to 22. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Nicole. I've just got a couple of questions. Some of them relate to an email that I sent when we saw this in workshop, although many of those were addressed in the revised draft. My first question is in relation to the engagement or the consultation that's going to take place. It mentions one of the ways we will do that is through attendance at pop-up events and sporting clubs where appropriate. And I'm just wondering what events we have identified that are happening, because there's not a lot happening at the moment, where we will have an opportunity to have a pop-up.
Through you, Nicole, I'll consult with the team and include that in the briefing notes.
I might just go through all my questions and then you can decide
that.
what can be answered right now. So I think we've referred to a 21-day public comment period. So I guess following on from the previous question, how we're going to manage that consultation within that short period of time, and are we confident that we'll be able to consult with SIPAG, which is obviously one of our later items tonight, within that 21-day period, or might we have to extend it? So that's something to think about.
So perhaps if I could just take
Sure.
that one. So through you, Mayor Cole, I think consulting with SIPAG, I think will be fairly straightforward once we have a decision of council and have appointed those members. I think your comment about pop-up events is probably more difficult. So I'd like to get the team to give me a response on that one.
Thank you. One of the questions I had earlier was around, we have some actions in this, the plan to ensure that our city events have youth criteria as part or youth focus as part of their planning. And I'm just wondering if any consideration has been given to how we could apply that to third-party events, particularly where we're one of the sponsors. And is that something that could be considered as part of funding criteria for grants for events in the future?
I'll take that one on notice. Thank you.
I also just wanted to confirm one of the actions, and I'm sorry I don't have the number, refers to ensuring that we plan for diversity of youth in our events.
Yep.
And just wondering if we could, again on notice, just have some clarification on what different types of diversity we're talking about, what range of young people. I had a question around, there's actions to do with linking with mental health service providers and whether we currently have those links in place or whether an action is required to ensure we make those links, because I'm not clear what current relationships we have, particularly for youth mental health services. And if we don't feel that that is developed enough, do we need to actually spell that out as an action in the plan? And then lastly, the questions were around addressing some of those key pillars that were identified through the consultation leading up to this plan, particularly the areas of environment and education that were identified by young people as being important issues for them, and not directly referred to in the plan. We have a lot of focus, which is great, on activities, events and engagement, but we don't specifically address those issues. And I'm just wondering, do we need specific actions, or do you feel that they are encapsulated by the actions we have? The points that I particularly pulled out were with the environment. Is this something that we consider can be addressed through our integration with other policies? So, for example, the sustainability policies that we have, that we would embed specific youth consultation on those issues. That's an idea. I'm not sure if that is the plan. And also in particular in relation to education, in the recent past, we've had some events that are around training and qualifications for young people, offering subsidised courses and things, and there doesn't seem to be any specific actions around that. So I'm just wondering if they could be included. And I acknowledge that some of these might be actions that we've earmarked for the plan beyond this, given that this has had to be reduced to a 2-year plan. But I just wanted to flag that as being quite important to address, given what we know has been identified as key items, key issues for young people. So happy for all of those to come through in the briefing notes. But yeah, just keen to make sure we've covered off those important issues.
Yeah,
Thanks.
through you, Mayor Cole, great set of questions. I'll take them on notice.
Thank you. Any other questions? Director, you mentioned recently that you had some thoughts around a digi-hub at the library, which would be a sort of appealing and innovative environment for young people. I was just wondering, is that outside the scope of the 2-year document, or is that an action that would fall within the library's capacity in the time frame of this document?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll give that some thought in terms of timeframes. We had that conversation in the context of looking at that Loftus precinct and how that could evolve over time. So yeah, let me take that on notice, and we'll give it some thought in terms of timeframes and its intersection with this plan.
Thank you very much. Any other questions on youth plan? Okay. Moving to 7.2, advertising of amendment to community funding policy, donation relief for seniors and the vulnerable. Any questions? Councillor Gondaszewski.
This just relates to the definitions within the policy. Under the policy, a donation is a cash contribution to an organisation or a group, whereas the proposed funding stream is available to residents, and I believe there's also no cash going to be distributed. I wondered if given that there appears to be a conflict between the new funding stream and the definitions, whether that was something that needed to be resolved within the document.
Yeah, I'll take that one on notice. As I understand, it's a definitional question around the definition of donation and whether or not that's the appropriate language for what we're proposing.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably solve it by just calling it something else.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah.
Got it. Yep. Thanks.
Councillors, I was just reflecting in the context of our disbursements through Leadable Gardens of close to $1 million, whether administration would see it appropriate to allocate a firm budget. It talks about up to $5,000, expects up to $5,000, but I thought that perhaps consideration could be given to actually having a firm budget around this, given that we do have significant PBI resources available to residents. And I note that this is to expand beyond this current state of emergency. Hopefully we don't have many states of emergency, but that it is a longer term strategy during emergency. But I thought for this particular period, given that there is that $1 million of dispersed funds, perhaps the city could consider what a firm budget would be appropriate for this type of additional support.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the way I see this provision is it's effectively a crisis and a safety net provision. I think we had a situation where we came across a resident who was required immediate support, and I think a staff member went to the shop and actually bought some food and provided it to that individual. So fantastic initiative, and this is intended to support those sorts of immediate ad hoc environment situations. I think we would use if the Leadable Gardens solutions are available, then we would probably refer the resident to those available services and just really draw on this on those very rare but important times where we need to support someone in the moment. Yeah. In terms of the question around a budget, I think I don't suspect that there will be many of these instances. We had one situation that I'm aware of during the COVID crisis. So I think if we were to put a budget provision, I think it would only need to be fairly small, and then we could look at reprioritising funding if we needed to top it up, if you like.
Thank you, Director. Okay, any further questions? Right. Item 7.3, investment report as at the 31st of May 2020. Note the decline in the interest rate every month. 7.4, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st of May to 31st of May 2020. I have a few questions. I'm happy for them to be taken on notice. There's reference to the pop-up play at Birdwood Square video, and I just wanted to ask whether that's intended to be used and broadcast to the community. What the use is. Culture counts, data collection, platform access and reporting. It would be good to have a bit more information about what that was for. And also just noted that there was temporary staff payments during May, and I just wanted to check whether temp staff were still engaged during working from home and whether they were in essential roles.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, item 7.5, financial statements as at the 31st of May 2020. Any questions? Okay. We've dealt with 7.6 at the beginning of the council briefing, which was the adoption of the 2021 annual budget. We spoke about that for an hour. So moving on to Chief Executive Officer items, 8.1, report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 30th of June 2020. Any questions? Okay. 8.2, advertising of new meeting procedures policy. Any questions? I have a technical governance question. I'm happy for this to be taken on notice. It refers to the CEO convening that the report is to come out as soon as possible for special council meetings after the CEO has convened the meeting. And I just wanted to clarify that administrative function is resulting from the calling of a meeting. So I assume that because the convening of a meeting is the CEO's responsibility at that time, the date, etc., and administrative arrangements are made, but that is an administrative function falling out from the calling of a special council meeting by council, 3 council members or the mayor.
Through you, Mayor Cole. We've used the word convening to mean actually providing public notice, so the administrative function. I'll have a think about whether there's a more appropriate word we could use to make that very clear that it's not the calling of the meeting, because as you said, that's the council's role.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Item 8.3, appointment of elected members and community representatives to advisory groups. Just knowing there are some impartiality interests on this. I don't think there are any financial interests on this item. No. Okay. Any questions on this item? Councillor Castle?
I do have a question, but it relates to the confidential attachment. So perhaps this needs to go at the end.
Certainly. Any other questions? Okay. And just to note that it would be very good to receive expressions of interest from council members on whether you'd like to be on one of these advisory groups. That would be very useful. So thank you to those who've already indicated an expression of interest. Okay, we're moving on. Sorry, Jonathan, sorry, Councillor Hallett.
Sorry, just a quick question about the number of community members that the Children and Young People Advisory Group only has up to 6 and the others have up to 10. Just wondering about, is that unruly children or some other reason?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that comes from the current terms of reference.
Maybe I'll have a go at answering that. I think that what we've found is that for certain groups, there is a high interest of community members. And I think with, I'm not sure how many were on the environmental advisory group, but this sustainability and transport has been combined from UMAG, Urban Mobility Advisory Group, and Sustainable Environment Advisory Group, or just Environmental Advisory Group, no sustainable. So I think it has literally been that there's been, in previous years, there's been so much interest that council has expanded. And I think it's also about where the Arts Committee has got a role, where they perform that role, and it's really good to make sure that there's a sort of quorum present for that group. And I think also there's quite a spread of expertise across sustainability and transport, so it'd be good to have a higher number. Anyway, they're just my general observations. Okay, but if there's anything further to add, please feel free to add it to the briefing notes. Okay, so we'll come back to the confidential attachments on that one. 8.4, advertising of new lease of portion of the Beatty Park Leisure Centre to Beatty Park Physiotherapy Proprietary Limited. Any questions on this item? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. It's not mentioned, I guess the report alludes to the negotiation, but it's not actually mentioned that the proposed tenant is accepting the lease anyway.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the tenant has agreed to the proposed terms. That was the negotiated rent. Apologies if that's not in the report. I'll add it in for the council meeting.
Throughout that period for that to be honoured, or once council, if council were to adopt this recommendation as is that, and you know, given that we're sort of speaking about Beatty Park having returned to higher than expected people coming through the doors, if there is a change in during, say, September, the reduction in revenue is 30%, is that taken into consideration?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that one on notice, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Toppelberg.
And just a question about outgoings. My understanding is that outgoings are the uncharged costs incurred that are real costs. So how is it that we've been able to negotiate that from $78? They suggested 50 and then down to 60. My understanding is that those costs are passed on at cost and there's no ability to charge for things that we aren't incurring as a cost. Are there subjective elements within that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, due to the configuration of the electricity charges at Beatty Park, it's impossible to accurately calculate the exact amount of electricity for that premises. So what we've done is got an estimate based on the average use in that area, and then we've agreed with them, and that's the current arrangement at the moment. And so we have, in negotiating the new lease, they've proposed a lower rate, and then we've reached a compromise position, which we're recommending to you. Can I also add, sorry, related to the previous question, we did have on page 242 that the physio had agreed to those terms.
Thank you, Manager. Good work. Any further questions on this item? Okay. Can I just ask, sorry, I just have to ask this question, because it's a $10,000 decrease in the current leasing fee, and I know that we're in the COVID situation, but have we had any sort of advice from a property manager about whether that's a lasting impact, or, you know, for example, should we be considering a 2-year review if COVID-19 and rebound, you know, happens over that period of time?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we did discuss with the valuer whether the valuation would have changed following COVID and whether they thought the proposal from the physio was reasonable, and they did suggest that it was, and that actually the recovery from COVID would take a while, so rents wouldn't probably go up to the amount that they'd predicted previously.
Thank you, appreciate that. Okay. Any further questions? No. Okay. 8.5, new lease of Robertson Park Tennis Centre to Tennis Association of WA. Any questions? 8.6, enabling model for service delivery and best practice regulation. Any questions? 8.7, advertising of new local government property local law and new election signs policy. Any questions on this one? I did have 2 questions. I just wanted to ask in relation to the election sign policy 2B2, clause 2B2, it says the things that election signs can't be attached to. Could we include verge trees or city-owned, or, you know, trees in the public realm?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can add that in to make it very clear.
I think it's mentioned a couple of times, so whenever it talks about or similar structures, it would be good to list trees as included, because I think we've seen a few nails into trees in the past. I also just wanted to ask, oh no, I think that's on another one. Yep, that was all on that one. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Unless there are any other questions? No. Moving on to 8.8, proposed transfer of Anzac Cottage to the National Trust of Western Australia. We have a financial interest. Councillor Castle is leaving the meeting. Any questions? I do have a few questions. I just felt that it would have been very beneficial for the city to be presented with some further information. I'm quite interested to know a little bit more about the sort of financial side of things in terms of the National Trust's ability to maintain the cottage over the long haul. And I wondered whether they had in place management plans that they would have covering their other assets. Because I think that in terms of going out to advertising, some of the key questions would be around the long-term sustainability and upkeep of the cottage. And I would feel this would be very valuable information. And I also thought that details of community access and a costing structure would be very valuable to have also. I'm just trying to think ahead of some of the questions that community members might ask. And also more of an assessment from administration on the proposal, because I think it's just sort of notes that administration supports the proposed transfer, but I think that given the nature of the asset, some further information about the National Trust's ability to maintain and give access to the cottage is very important. And then the administration's assessment on that as a sort of viable and good outcome for the cottage.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can provide some further details and seek some of that further detail from the National Trust included in the briefing notes, and certainly some of that information could be included in public consultation depending on Council's consideration of the item on Tuesday. And we can also provide further assessment on the proposal for the National Trust to take over the ownership of the cottage.
Just also another question in relation to clause 2 and providing local public notice of the proposed transfer. I'd just like to request whether consideration could be given to increasing the consultation period from 14 days to at least 21 days. And if the report could include some information about the consultation, what that would entail.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can include that. We wouldn't have any objections to a longer consultation period. There's no huge urgency on the proposal. As a general comment, in terms of our contact and discussions with the National Trust, as well as the two community groups, one the lessee, the Vietnam Veterans Association of WA, and the Friends as Vansack Cottage, that an overall comment on city support for the proposal is that the National Trust is a purpose-specific organisation to look after, promote, protect heritage assets and buildings like this one. It would provide a level of a national network, a national expertise, and a membership base who are experts in promoting, preserving, and protecting these type of historical and heritage assets, which would be over and above our own internal resources or capacity or expertise. So we think that would add value to Anzac Cottage, both its membership base, their in-house expertise, and they've certainly provided some assurances about their financial capacity to ensure ongoing maintenance of the building. There was a property inspection, and it has been found that the cottage is being kept in very good order. So there are no known large-scale maintenance or structural issues which would need to be addressed. And we think that the proposal is logical, sound, and in the best interests of the level of marketing and information and networks that National Trust have in the community.
That arises over, say, the next 3 to 5 years, and just like clarity that if we were to agree to the transfer of the cottage, that would be final, and that any maintenance costs would be borne by the National Trust. So I think these are important considerations that need to be finalised before there's advertising to the community in consideration of disposal. Councillor Smith?
That was exactly my question.
Oh, apologies.
No, it's fine. Thank you. You covered it.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. Perhaps someone could let Councillor Castle know. Yes. Thanks, Councillor Castle. Okay. 8.9, advertising of amended development on city-owned and managed land policy. Questions? Sorry, I have a question. I just wanted to check. It did talk about on page 332 that where there was an intent to privatise the space, that the CEO may present the proposal to council for consideration. I think that the intent from that council is tried to convey is that where any structure is built in the public realm, there is an interest that council wants to see the proposal. And it seems that this is differentiating, that this policy is about structures that don't privatise the public space, but where there is talk of a process where there is an attempt to privatise the public space. And I think the same principle would apply, that council would like to see the proposal in either circumstance. So I just wanted to clarify that, because if not, then I might just flag an amendment.
Through you, Mayor Cole. So since this policy was advertised and based on some comments at the council workshop, we made some changes to make it clear that structures that would privatise the space are outside the scope of this policy. So they're not one of the 3 tiers, but we did include in the policy in the scope section the process for dealing with them. So if if the city received this proposal for a structure that's looking to privatise the space, so like an enclosed veranda with decking, that kind of thing, which, with doors that actually excludes the public from going into the space, then the city would assess it in line with our strategic priorities and any other relevant policies and plans. And if we're looking at supporting it, so if it does seem to align, we would definitely provide it to council for approval. So it's very clear that all those proposals have to come to council. But the reason we wanted to, that we've proposed to include that the CEO may, is so that if it's a structure that is not in line with any of our strategies or policies, so something maybe private infrastructure that has no community benefit at all, doesn't align with any of our strategies and policies, it wouldn't need to come to council. The CEO could just say no. So otherwise, I guess we've got proposals that come in from the public that potentially very clearly don't align with our policies, strategies, and don't need to be presented to council. The CEO can just say no. So that's the intent of that clause. I can review the wording and see if I can make it a bit more clear if you're happy with that objective, though.
I absolutely understand what you're saying. I'm just having another look to see if I've not read it correctly. I see what you're saying. So it's saying that if the proposal does not align with the city's relevant plans and strategies, the CEO may refuse the proposal. And then it says the CEO may, at his absolute discretion, present the proposal to council for consideration. So maybe it's just about linking those 2 sentences to make that absolutely clear, because I've misread that and perhaps others may or may not do the same.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I'll review and revise the wording.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions on this one? No? Okay. 8.10, elected members professional development register 1920. Any questions? Just wondered whether it was worth asterisking that Councillor Gonchevsky and I have actually done this training in the past, even though it's dropped off the time frame of acceptability. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. That's kind of the question I had. I realise that it's beyond the scope of the new clauses in the Local Government Act, but I'm just wondering if we are to be publishing a register on our website of training that's been completed, whether we've considered actually expanding that report to include the training that's been done in other time periods that was not required. The register as it is doesn't present the full picture of what training has been completed by all council members.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's a good point. And we were proposing moving forward to keep an updated register on our website at all times. And so each month or maybe 2 months, depending how much training is completed, we'd update that. And we can also include training completed retrospectively.
What did you think of my asterisk idea? Just an idea. Well, you know, the fact is that many of us have undertaken this training, but it just hasn't met the time frame within its being valid for compulsory training. I guess that's the point.
So just questions, it's maybe a question for Councillor Castle for next week, but my understanding was the intent is to meet the requirement of the Local Government Act for maintaining the register, not as a scorecard necessarily of who's done what when. And my understanding is the requirement is in any given financial year, at any time the previous financial year has to be publicly available. Is that correct? And also just confirming that as of the changes which came into effect last year, once someone is elected, by October of the following year, it's mandatory they have to complete that training to be able to continue to serve as an elected member. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to note the intent of the report and the register is just to meet that minimum requirement under the change of the Act for that register. There is some wording around, and there was some debate before the changes were made to the Act about whether this was mandatory training or universal training. I'm not quite sure if the question from Councillor Topperberg is what the sanction would be on an elected member for not completing by October. I don't think there is it's a requirement, but I don't think there's any sanction. Is that right?
Thank you, CEO. Are there any further questions on this one? Okay. 8.11, information bulletin. Councillor Loden.
Just recognising the acting director hasn't had the opportunity to answer a question. I thought I'd just query about the development statistics, noting that they seem to be trending in an upwards direction. And have you had any comment on that?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yeah, the trend based on the info bulletin seems to indicate that they haven't really been experiencing a drop-off in the volume of applications. You will note that the timeframes are also still being maintained, which is good to see. But you will notice that the value of the applications pending, that value has dropped off, and that's in line with, I guess, an uptake of more minor nature developments in the system. So that's the trend for the time being, and we'll just wait to see what that looks like in the future.
Councillor Topperberg.
Thank you. Happy for it to be taken on notice, but and apologies that I hadn't. I'll bring it up at the next working group meeting. But so it's on page 357, which is just the actions coming out of the RAP working group, and it talks about human resources to review the CAT online free demo, which is the cultural awareness training. My understanding from the time when the human resources manager brought it up to the RAP working group, that it was, for want of a better term, shot down in flames at that point. And it's presented there as, can I just confirm that that's an ongoing review of the best way to deliver cultural awareness training, not of the potential for the online service that was being proposed to actually be instituted at Vincent?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I wasn't aware of the history of that, so I'll take that one on notice and have a look into it.
I think what the program that was available was based out of, was written from Victoria and wasn't locally relevant, and there was a strong feeling amongst the RAP working group, and particularly the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander members, that that was something that they would think would be at odds with their view of what cultural awareness training within Western Australia should be.
Thank you.
Councillors, any more questions on the information bulletin? Okay, so that means that we just have 2 items to deal with, confidential attachments for 6.2 and 8.3. So we will have to close the doors and go behind them for a short period. So we'll just have to pause our web stream and say thank you very much for joining us, member of the public gallery.